Chapter 4 The Final Stand. The metallic taste of fear sat heavy on our tongues as we pushed forward, each step sinking us deeper into the unknown. The stench of decay grew thicker, a putrid reminder of what lay ahead. It wasn't just a smell, it was a presence, clinging to our clothes, seeping into our very souls. We could feel it crawling over our skin, a silent promise that none of us would leave untouched or unscarred. The air buzzed with an almost tangible hum, like the static before a storm, charging the atmosphere with a sense of impending doom. The harsh, flickering lights above us struggled, casting long, erratic shadows that danced across the narrow corridor halls, straining to keep the darkness at bay. Our hearts pounded in sync with each flicker, a testament to our resolve. We knew we were walking into a massacre, yet still, we marched. The shadows suddenly shifted, morphing into grotesque abominations of sinew and rusted steel. 3 razors emerged, each a towering monstrosity, their forms dripping with ichor that glistened like foul oil under the flickering lights. Their bodies were a hideous amalgamation of sharp, jagged metal and twisted, sinewy muscle, giving them an almost skeletal appearance. Their eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with an unearthly pale light, filled with an intelligence that seemed to delight in suffering. Each movement they made was accompanied by the grating screech of rusted metal grinding against itself, a sound that grated against our sanity. Their long, bladed limbs were coated in gore, ending in wickedly serrated edges that promised only agony. They were surrounded by their mindless puppet minions, emaciated, hollow-eyed husks that moved with jerky, unnatural precision. The razors descended upon us with hellish speed, their bodies blurring as they lunged forward, shrieking with an ear-splitting wail that burrowed deep into our bones, setting every nerve on fire with fear. Their shrieks were not just a sound, they were a weapon, a discordant assault that seemed to twist the air around us, amplifying our dread and choking out any hope of survival. This wasn't just survival. This was war, and we were facing nightmares made flesh. Victoria's voice split the air first, her battle cry cutting through the chaos.
"Come, demons! Come taste faith and steel! For the Lord, no mercy! No remorse!"
Kendra echoed, her voice a war drum beat pounding through the corridor. Zack and Evo tightened their grips on their rifles, a well-practiced unity marking their movements.
"No respite!"
They roared in unison, their voices laced with defiance and grit. In the heartbeat of silence that followed, the weight of mortality pressed down on us, as real as the blood soaking our boots. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was a strange exhilaration, a fervor born of desperation. Words I never thought I'd say ripped from my throat.
"Kill them! All of them! Leave none alive!"
Then the battlefield erupted. I lunged, my huntsman slicing through the throat of a puppet that charged from my left, its shrill gurgling cut short as the black gore splattered across my face. Behind me, Kendra's sword flashed in the flickering light as she buried it into the skull of a razor. It screeched, twisting around with an unnatural flexibility, its maw opening wide enough to tear through bone. But she held firm, wrestling it down with raw fury. Evo and Zack formed a line of thunder and fire, their rifles discharging round after round into the oncoming horde. Each shot slammed into the puppet masses, breaking through flesh and bone. leaving a grotesque trail of shattered limbs, but the numbers kept coming, like a swarm driven by a singular, malevolent purpose. Through the carnage, I caught sight of Victoria in a deadly dance with another razor. Its bladed arms clanged against her katana, sparks flying as she maneuvered with precision and deadly grace. Her face was set in a grim determination, a prayer slipping from her lips with each strike. She blocked, parried, spun away, only to press in closer, daring the beast to take a misstep. And finally, she found her opening, slicing her blade against and into its skull with a fierce cry.
"For the light! For the future!"
As another razor rushed me, I saw its rusted blades extend, gleaming with an unholy red. I threw myself forward, sliding low and stabbing upwards, feeling the steel hit something vital as it howled in fury. But it didn't falter. Instead, its clawed hand gripped my arm with impossible strength, wrenching me up and slamming me into the wall, knocking the breath from my lungs. Dazed, I could barely make out the silhouette of Kendra charging, her blade raised high as she swung down, cleaving into its arm and freeing me. I scrambled to my feet, blood dripping from my nose, eyes blurring in and out of focus. "Ah, you ugly bastard!" I snarled, gathering my strength. I could feel the fatigue, but I pushed it aside, driven by the ferocity of the moment. My companions were giving everything they had, and so would I. With a primal roar, I felt a blind fury erupt inside me as the razor's bladed arm grazed my lore book, the cherished tome strapped to my side. My vision tunneled, the world narrowing to just me and this monstrosity. I launched myself at it, my forehead slamming into its rusted skull with a sickening crunch. Pain flared, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. The razor staggered, momentarily stunned, and I seized the opportunity. My huntsman's blade found its mark, plunging into its chest again and again, my screams echoing through the corridor. "Die! Die, filth! This lore is not yours to claim!" I drove it into its throat, black gore spilling out and drenching my hands and face. I knew if I didn't end it now, my lore would be lost, my companions left without another person to help. The rager thrashed, but I held it down. The world fading to the sound of my heartbeat and the tearing of metal and flesh. My arms burned, but I kept stabbing and stabbing until its movement ceased and the light in its ghastly eyes dimmed to nothing. Zack and Evo stood back to back, a whirling storm of precision and hatred. They moved in perfect synchronization, dropping puppets at a rate that would make a waterfall blush, their rifles discharging in rhythmic bursts. Each called out shots for the other, their voices sharp and unwavering, guiding their aim through the chaos. Every spent magazine was ejected and replaced without hesitation, their hands moving as though they shared one mind. The puppets fell in droves, their grotesque forms piling up around Zack and Evo until the heap of broken bodies nearly reached their chests. Then the inevitable click, both rifles running dry. Without missing a beat, they tossed their rifles aside, blades flashing free. Evo's combat knife gleamed in the dim light, while Zack wielded a long, brutal sword. They dove into the fray with a fervor I had never seen before, hacking through the puppet ranks with raw, unrestrained violence. Fists broke jaws, blades pierced chests, and the two of them carved a path towards Kendra and me, their expressions grim and focused. The remaining puppets stood no chance as Zack and Evo fought like men possessed, a blur of steel and fury. Each swing of Zack's sword was followed by the crunch of bone, while Evo's knife found the gaps between sinew and rusted plating. They found their way through the dwindling masses, pushing onward even as the razors bore down on Kendra and myself. Somewhere in the chaos, Victoria was unseen, but her fierce war cries echoed above the din, her blade singing as it ripped through flesh and clanged against wrong steel.
I am myself. I know who I fight for. You will not have me, demons!
Victoria's voice, fierce and unyielding, cut through the cacophony of chaos, an unwavering beacon amidst the screams of agony and the unholy shrieks of the razors. Her words held power, a defiance that transcended the madness around us, and with each chant, her resolve seemed to grow stronger, fueling her every movement. Suddenly, she burst through a heap of puppets, her katana gleaming with a grim promise. She had been separated from us, lost in the swirling sea of enemies. Yet there she stood, fighting alone, a lone warrior on an island of horrors. Her eyes were wild, filled with a righteous fury that seemed almost otherworldly. She moved like a force of nature, slicing and cutting her way through the monstrous puppets that clawed at her from every angle. Each strike was deliberate, each movement a testament to her willpower. The pile of puppets she emerged from was littered with broken, twisted bodies, proof of her struggle, of her unwavering determination to survive. Nightmarish figures surrounded her, their grotesque forms closing in like waves. But she fought on, unbroken. She was alone, surrounded by sights that would have driven others mad. Distorted faces, hollowed eyes that mirrored the depths of despair, limbs twisted in ways that defied nature. But Victoria did not falter. With every swing of her gore-covered blade, her voice rose louder, a chant that reverberated throughout the corridor.
I am Victoria! I fight for the light! You will not break me!
Her war cry was not just a declaration. It was a promise, a vow that echoed above the grotesque symphony of battle. She was a light amidst the darkness, her spirit untamed, refusing to be extinguished. The horrors around her could not break her, and in that moment she seemed almost invincible, a figure of hope amidst the nightmarish chaos. Seeing Victoria in such a fervor, battered and bruised, Kendra herself broke into a sprint, her heart pounding like a war drum, her muscles burning with the effort. Every step was a battle in itself as she rushed towards Victoria, her eyes never leaving her friend, even as the chaos erupted around us. The corridor seemed to warp, the darkness pressing in from every direction, the flickering lights barely holding back the oppressive gloom. The air was thick with the stench of blood and gunpowder, a cloying reminder of the stakes we faced. The puppets lunged at me with skeletal hands, their emaciated forms a grotesque parody of humanity. Evo gripped me firmly, dragging me towards an open doorway. My mind was spinning, but I managed to see Zack in action, his hands moving with practiced precision, drawing his pistol and ejecting the empty magazine, hammering home a fresh one, racking the slide with a steady motion that spoke of relentless discipline. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement, just a mechanical efficiency that was almost hypnotic amidst the chaos. Blood was caking my face, hot and sticky, and I could barely see through the mess. The coppery tang filled my nostrils, and I wasn't sure if it was mine or the razors that I had somehow managed to take down. Evo pulled me into what looked like a bathroom, and I caught sight of my blood smearing bright and red across the ground. Shit, that's not good. That's too bright to be those horrors' blood, I thought, the realization stabbing through the haze of pain. Evo's gaze flickered to Zack, his hands already digging through his pack for bandages. "Go help them! I've got him!" he shouted, urgency dripping from his voice. Zack didn't need to be told twice. "Ah, on it!" he yelled, hurling himself out the doorway, the heavy door slamming shut behind him with a resounding bang that seemed to shake the walls. The moment Zack left, the walls seemed to close in further, the darkness pressing down on us. Ivo worked quickly, his hands trembling but focused as he began to wrap my wounds. I could see sweat pouring down his face, his jaw clenched in concentration. It was only then I noticed the dark stain spreading from his side, his own blood mixing with mine. He was injured, but the adrenaline, the need to save me, seemed to numb him to his own pain. The muffled screams from outside grew louder, primal and guttural, and my blood ran cold. Gunshots echoed, followed by the sickening thud of bodies being thrown against the walls and the awful, drawn-out groans of the dying. The noise seemed to make the very air tremble, and the door shook in its frame. Then I heard it, the worst sound of them all, a wail of utter despair. "Kendra!" Zack's voice, raw with desperation, rang out from beyond the door, and before I could react, it burst open. Victoria stumbled through, dragging Kendra behind her. Zack backed in, his face contorted in anguish as he emptied his last magazine into the horde beyond the door. He then slammed it shut, throwing his weight against it and sliding to the ground, his breath ragged and shallow. His hands moved automatically, reaching for ammunition, but his face was pale and his eyes were empty, haunted. "Tell me she's okay," Zack blurted out, all while keeping his weight against the door. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I didn't know that puppet was so thin. Oh, God, tell me she's alive." He sounded broken, like a man lost in the aftermath of his own actions. Tears welled in his eyes, and I couldn't bear to look at him. Instead, I turned my gaze to Kendra, lying face down on the floor. A massive slash marred her back, a deep, jagged wound that only a long blade could have caused. My stomach twisted as I understood what had happened. Zack had struck her, not realizing it in the frenzy. Ivo, still bleeding, was too focused on his own injuries to react, his hands stained in his own blood. Zack, lost to his despair, seemed unable to even recognize his own state. Victoria knelt by Kendra, her face twisted in a way I had never seen. Gone was the righteous fury that had driven her. Now there was only fear, worry, and helplessness. Victoria rolled Kendra over gently, her hands trembling as she checked for any sign of life. The silence was suffocating as we all watched, hoping and praying for a miracle. But as Victoria shook her, calling her name, there was nothing, no response. Kendra's eyes stared blankly into the void, her once fierce expression now empty. Victoria's voice cracked, her lips quivering as she finally spoke the words we all dreaded.
She's dead."
It was as if the world stopped. The chaos beyond the door became a distant hum, and the room shrunk until all that was left was us and the cold, hard truth. Kendra was gone. The fight had taken another piece of us, and there was no getting it back. We were broken, battered, and standing on the precipice of despair. The reality of this little war had never felt more brutal or final.
It's not over. Not yet,"
Victoria said, reaching into her bag. Somehow, a smile grew on my face, recognizing what she was holding. "No," I choked out. "Oh, it is not." End of chapter 4.